Welcome to FACT's webinar called Predator Protection for Poultry. Our presenter is Jan Dohner. This webinar is hosted by Food Animal Concerns Trust. I am Larissa McKenna, FACT's Humane Farming Program Director, and I will be moderating this evening's webinar. Thanks for joining us. So to begin with just a few quick introductions, FACT is a nonprofit national organization that is headquartered in Illinois. We promote the safe and humane production of meat, milk, and eggs. I direct FACT's Humane Farming Program, which provides a number of opportunities for livestock and poultry farmers. And this webinar is part of our Humane Farming webinar series. Please visit our website to learn more about all of our farmer services, including our mentorship program and the oodles of other webinars we have coming up this winter. So at this time, I'm delighted to introduce our esteemed presenter, Jan Dohner. Jan is an author, educator, and researcher who lives on her small family farm in Michigan. Jan has over 40 years of experience using livestock guardian dogs for predator control, and she's the author of Livestock Guardian Dogs, Livestock Guardians using dogs, donkeys, and llamas to protect your herd, as well as the Encyclopedia of Animal Predators. We are incredibly lucky to have Jan with us tonight to share her experience and her expertise. She will be available to answer your questions later on in this webinar. So with that, I'm going to let Jan get started with her presentation. Jan, please take it away.
Hi, Larissa. Can you hear me? Larissa?
I can, yes.
Okay, good.
Yes.
Can you... Here we go. I'm looking for the slide thing. There we go. It just didn't appear right away. I want to welcome everybody. It looks like we do have a good mix of people, so it should be, hopefully we're going to talk about all these different aspects. And frequently, even though you might have a small flock or a small family flock, lots of people find that they're venturing into commercial production, whether it's selling things at farmers markets or they start having direct sales or things like that. So it just kind of, will cover everything. There is a lot of information tonight. So instead of taking notes, I encourage you to maybe download the slides or view the webinar again later if there's a portion of it that you may need to study a little more thoroughly. And it's great that they're available for us. Tonight, we're going to address both backyard and small poultry keeping as well as larger pasture operations. And we'll be talking about how you assess the potential threats both in your area and then more specifically on your farm, how you can identify predator damage when it occurs, and finally look at the prevention strategies that are going to help you prevent it, hopefully. So just a terminology sort of agreement thing here. Poultry is technically birds, domesticated birds raised for meat, eggs, or feathers. And exotic birds or some game birds are not necessarily poultry, but many of the same things we're going to talk about apply to them as well if you're keeping those kinds of birds. So predation. It's a fact of life, obviously, from a cat catching a mouse to a larger predator attacking your birds. It's essential to survival and essential to ecology, and we all know that. However, it's also enormously upsetting when you discover a killed animal. Sometimes we have a deep attachment to our animals. It can be an economic loss to our farm. It might be a loss of valuable genetics to your flock. And it's especially emotional if the death is gruesome. So your response is usually anger, and the problem is it's too late, right? So the best solution is to be aware of the threats and then to be proactive in implementing and practicing good prevention techniques. So let's begin by assessing potential threats. And it's not just your neighborhood, it's sort of your greater community as well. So how do you figure out who's out there? Well, you need to consult range maps for predators that might be found in your area. And something to be aware of is that almost all of our predators are extending their ranges due to both climate changes and just the increasing predator populations. We're also seeing more singletons or roamer individual animals that are wandering outside of their expected ranges, and they're kind of like the forerunners of maybe later larger numbers that we're going to see. Another place to get an idea on predators that are bothering farmers in your state is to take a look at the NASS, N-A-S-S, which stands for National Agricultural Statistics Service. because it has regional and state statistics about predation to livestock. Now, that's not poultry, but it is telling you what other people are seeing in your state. Other good places to sort of look for information on websites or to contact them are your state DNR, your state ag and extension services. I would also encourage you to, pay attention to county and city websites or Facebook groups or email. Pay attention to local news and online neighborhood groups and talk to your neighbors because you just need to sort of constantly be aware of what people are seeing. Maybe that's the way you'll discover even if there is a problem animal in your neighborhood. Then you need to consider the greater terrain that's in your area. I mean, you may live in Michigan like I do and know which predators farmers usually see because I looked at, the national statistics. But then I also need to kind of look at my general area. Am I near a lot of forest land or wetland? Is there undeveloped land near me or even maybe wilderness? That's going to make a difference in what you might see as well. You need to think about seasonal changes for predators because their behaviors change when they're feeding a litter or maybe if there's a drought or a harsh winter. So those kinds of things you need to be aware of as well. And finally, it's really valuable to start keeping your own personal identification or a log of what you're seeing and when you're seeing it, because it will help sort of inform you about what to expect next year. And I'll tell you, trail cameras have become really affordable and they're really good now. And they're just a terrific tool for sort of monitoring what's going on at night. They're good near fence lines, outside of buildings, and frequently people are discovering something that they didn't know was out there. So, of course, the list of possible poultry predators is huge. And many of these animals have greatly extended their ranges just in our lifetimes. Unfortunately, there are no official statistics about poultry loss, unlike livestock, as I mentioned. So we sort of have to just, start applying our own information and with people we talk to see what it is that we need to be worrying about. So the coyote and fox are obviously two poultry predators that are really common for most people in the country. Unfortunately, their victim is usually carried or often carried away, so you might not find it. Coyotes have greatly extended their ranges. Their original home was just on the Great Plains, and now they are everywhere, adapted to even the most urban of environments. You may have either one or both of the red and gray foxes. You might be more familiar with the red fox, who also has greatly expanded its range. It used to live in the northeastern part of the country. And then with reforestation, the gray fox has moved back into northern areas and again closer to urban areas. And if you're not used to a gray fox, it's another serious threat to poultry because it has the ability to climb trees. It can go straight up trunks. It can jump between branches. So you might not be expecting that kind of behavior from a fox. Bobcats are an extremely secretive animal, and most people haven't actually seen one, although the population in the country is now estimated to be about 1 million. They are found throughout most of the United States, except for the heart of the Midwest and the coastal regions of sort of the Mid-Atlantic and New England states. They don't prefer really flat, open cropland or deep snow, and that's why some of those areas don't see them. But they're also moving into suburban and urban areas, and they're moving northward with warming temperatures and into lynx areas and producing crossbreeds, which is another sort of predator that we're seeing. And again, the victim is often carried away, so you don't find necessarily a carcass. So the weasel family includes the rare wolverine, the long-tailed weasel, fishers, American badgers, the ermine or short-tailed weasel, martens and minks, and they're all major predators of poultry. And most of them can also be instinctively triggered to kill multiple birds at one time, which we call surplus killing, which is can be a really distressing thing to a lot of poultry owners. The long-tailed weasel is usually the culprit when the predator has squeezed through a tiny 1-inch opening in chicken wire or something. Or if you find a pile of bird carcasses, often with maybe only some blood eaten. Mink don't venture very far from water, but the damage signs are very similar. The fisher's range is limited in the US, but where it lives, it's adapting more and more to suburban areas. So for our friend in Hawaii, the small Asian mongoose has become a really terrible problem for residents where it has become invasive, and it kills birds and steals eggs. And mongoose proof fencing is essential because just like a weasel, it can slip through very small openings. And then there's the northern raccoon, who was originally an inhabitant just of our wooded southeast, and it's now found virtually everywhere across the United States, except maybe very high mountains or arid deserts. It's, as many of us know, a major predator of poultry, and it's also a public health problem because raccoons carry rabies and several other serious diseases that can be transmitted to people and other animals. And I'm always advising people that raccoon feces, above most everything else, should be treated with really great care, even when they're dry. There's a lot of potential things you can get from raccoon feces. And the signs that a raccoon has bothered your flock is often that several birds are killed in one night, the heads may be bitten off, sometimes legs or feet, or are grabbed through chicken wire and pulled off or damaged. And then clearing the dense forest enabled skunks to greatly expand their ranges as well. Virtually every area of the lower 48 states have either striped or spotted skunks or both, as long as they have access to some water. They're attracted to human sources of food, including like garbage, bird feeders, pet food, beehives, and stuff. So they're also a common predator. They may prey on one or two birds, only eating the head or maybe the abdomen. They often take chicks away. If they bother eggs, they crush them inward from one end, which makes it easy to sort of identify who probably ate that egg. The opossum is our only marsupial in North America, and they've also extended their range outward from southeastern United States. By the 1960s, they were now found in southern Ontario and in many eastern and central states, including urban areas. And then out west, unfortunately, escapees from fur and meat farms introduced them out throughout the western states. It's probably the one invasive animal we have spread elsewhere too. I've heard from friends that there's now about 1 million escapee invasive raccoons in Europe, and they're also a problem in Japan. So no one should be releasing an opossum anywhere. They're highly adapted to living with people, and no one hunts them any longer. So the population has really grown significantly. They do eat ticks, which is the positive thing that you hear about them, but they also spread EPM, which is a deadly disease to horses. When they attack poultry, they generally only bother one bird or a chick, and when they bother eggs, they tend to very messily crush the whole egg. Rats can carry off eggs and chicks and young birds. Sometimes you find chicks or small birds stuck in rat tunnels. They will chew on birds or bite their legs, and that's a telltale sign that maybe rats are starting to bother your birds, if you notice that. Their holes and tunnels also allow other predators access into your coop, like snakes or other small animals like weasels or something that can get in. The presence of rats also attracts larger predators that are hunting them, but that brings them in closer to your farm. Then we have hawks and eagles, which are actually birds in the same larger family. Golden eagles are found in a healthy population throughout the West, with scattered pockets a little bit in the East. Bald eagles are found out through much of the country, and in the 1950s there were only 400 pairs. We now believe the population is a few thousand. Unfortunately, they have become a major problem in some areas where they're bothering large field-raised poultry that are out on large, pastured flocks. The most common hawks that farmers encounter include Coopers and red-tails, because they're found across the country. In the eastern part of the U.S., we see red-shouldered hawks, and in the north and the west, we tend to see northern goshawks. Now, both eagles and hawks can carry a bird away entirely, although birds with heavier carcasses are often found nearby because they can't carry them far. Sometimes all we find are feathers at the site from the actual attack, or maybe the hawk or eagle pulling some feathers off. The great horned owl is found across the U.S. The barred owl is primarily in the eastern and central areas. The other big owls that we have, the snowy and the great gray, are not common near farmyards, so they're not typically a problem. And the medium-sized barn owls are really great little rodent hunters, and they are also less common predators of poultry. Unusual things about owls are they will walk on the ground to enter open coops at night, and they can squeeze through openings around gates, probably behaviors you don't expect of them. They usually eat their prey at the site of the kill, but sometimes it is carried away as well. Then the family of crows, ravens, and magpies, and even black-billed magpies and jays as well. They can all be a threat to hatchlings or nesting birds. The major problem we're seeing now is that the raven population is greatly increasing in its range areas, and it's also moving back into the northeastern parts of the country. Ravens adapt readily to living near people. They're bold and clever problem solvers, as most of us know, and they're proving a challenge because they will sometimes, for instance, aggressively confront a rooster that's trying to protect his flock, or they will work together to take adult birds. They're attracted to artificial water sources in arid areas and food waste, so that's a thing that you might be able to control to help discourage them from your area. And then finally, the snapping turtles, snakes, crocs, gators, all those kinds of things. Rat and king snakes are the most common threat to eggs and poultry. They're non-venomous. They come in many different varieties. Snapping turtles are also a problem because they will prey on waterfowl and occasionally poultry that ventures close to waterways. They're not usually far from them. And for our friends down in the south in Florida, alligators will also take poultry as well, especially waterfowl that venture too close. We do need to mention the large predators, the big three as I sometimes call them, but they are less of a threat to poultry every day as the other smaller predators. If they are in your area, you may need more robust shelters and other protection measures, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. We have seen here in the upper Midwest that wolves can be a threat to pastured poultry, and we've had cases where fields of pastured turkeys, because there's a large number of them, have attracted wolves, and that's been a problem. Mountain lion predation on poultry is rare, but it can occur. Fortunately, with bears, electric fencing is a really good deterrent to bears, and it's something that you can implement either around your coop or around your bird area or something, and we'll talk about that a minute or two here. Finally, I need to mention dogs and cats. It's a really common threat that we don't often think about, and it might be your family pet itself or your neighbors, or it could be a feral one. It can occur day or night. With cats, it's usually a very young or small bird that might be attacked or is missing. They will eat a chick or kill a chick. Sometimes they only eat the heads of them. Dog damage is usually more dramatic. They will eat eggs, of course, but when they get into birds, they will often kill several of them, and many of them will be mauled, maybe not actually dead. Often they're not eaten at all. Sometimes dogs play with poultry and, just kill it from, being so much stronger. Sometimes they lick poultry to death. Sometimes birds are missing limbs or heads through a fence because a dog has grabbed it as well. So it's another thing we have to watch out for. So let's talk a little bit about once you know the physical ranges of predators that you need to consider as a possibility on your farm. You need to think about the factors that affect your overall risk on your specific farm. So take a careful look at your own farm or ranch terrain. And here we're talking about, do you have heavily wooded areas? Do you have rough or open pastures? Are the pastures maybe that you're using for free-ranging poultry a distance from human residence and activity, which makes them more vulnerable? Is there a lot of cover either in or around the areas that the poultry's in? You need to think about specific predator attractions that you would have on your property. Like, is there good prey in the area, even if it's good deer habitat. You will attract more predators because it's a place that predators, will seek to come hunt. Do you also raise other livestock? So if you have newborn sheep or other animals, those are also vulnerable animals that will attract predators and that will then maybe bother your poultry. Think about other attractants on your property like water, especially in arid areas where predators are looking for a water source, food, garbage, shelter, and then finally there's sort of your own husbandry practices. Like, are you more inclined to be free-ranging birds, or do you have birthing animals in your pastures? Do you have unprotected hay or crop storage that will attract predators in to maybe hunt rats or something similar? Are you away even from your home a great deal? Because human presence helps to discourage predators as well. And you sort of take all these things into account and you make some decisions about maybe where on your farm you need to avoid certain pastures or certain areas during certain times of the year when it maybe is more likely that you will have predation. Whether or not you need to pen up your animals, your poultry at night when they're going to be vulnerable, when you're maybe more likely to have some daytime risks as well. So that gets into the whole topic of when attacks usually occur. And I think we know most of these things, but there's also some other things to consider. Ill or struggling predators will appear at odd times. Young adults hunt at odd times and in very bold or clumsy ways as well. Predators who are feeding their young are also sometimes seen out during the day. And something that researchers have noticed with foxes is foggy or rainy weather during the day will sort of embolden them to think maybe it's dusk, and they're more likely to prey as well. So you use these things that are happening on your farm seasonally and when attacks are normally, likely to occur, and you use it to make decisions like when you will maybe confine your poultry or when it will be safer maybe to turn them out to range. Maybe where to situate new poultry areas if you're developing them, or where you want to brood poultry or raise very young birds in maybe more protected areas. So the next step then becomes identifying predator damage when it does occur, so that you can determine the culprit to the best of your ability and then protect against it. So it's kind of like crime scene investigation here. You need to gather your clues to help you determine if it was actually an attack or whether it was a natural death. Maybe it was caused by an accident. Maybe it's scavenging is involved after a natural death or an accident. Maybe it's a domestic animal versus a wild one. So the most important thing is to try to take your observations the sooner the better before the scene gets altered, and it can even be altered by other animals on your farm. Photos are always better than memory. Take pictures of wounds, the condition of the body, the entire scene. Put an object or a small ruler in the photo to help you determine the size of any tracks or bite marks. Take photos of more than one track, even the whole track pattern if you can. Think about whether you heard any vocalizations or sounds. Look for signs of struggle in the attack area, feathers, blood spatter maybe, or tracks. And you have to investigate the entire area, especially if you have a missing bird, because sometimes the predator takes it 20 or 30 feet away to consume it. Even see if you smell anything. Musky smells are associated with certain predators. Look for scat. Scavenging can easily occur, and this complicates your search for a culprit. Even chickens, as we know, will pick out another dead animal, just like the cannibalization problem that we sometimes have with poultry. So after you gather all these clues, you need to begin your research phase. You use these clues and you try to focus in on the likely suspects, thinking about things like time of attack, whether you're missing an animal or eggs, specific damage to an animal, whether it's alive or dead, teeth or talon marks or claw marks, other observations, and then you identify your likely suspects and you read more about them in particular. Now, it's useful to do a little bit of a field autopsy if you can. And poultry feathers are particularly a good source of some information when you're trying to make some of these decisions, specifically whether or not the base is clean or whether it has tissue attached. In addition to that, You may also need to pull out a few more feathers to maybe look for clear signs of a bite mark or talon marks. When bites are made to a living animal, there is bruising or hemorrhaging. If there is no bruising or hemorrhaging on what you think is a bite mark, that bite mark might have occurred after death, and maybe the animal died a natural death. It's the same thing with profuse bleeding. Bleeding in large amounts can only occur before death and right afterwards. If there's no bleeding, that leads you to think more likely that it's a natural cause, or there's maybe some scavenging that has been involved. Now, I don't expect you to read this whole chart here. This is the damage ID chart from my book, but it illustrates the thought process that you need to go through. So you've sort of gathered up all the signs that we have been talking about, and you add to that the general situation that you're seeing. For instance, things like if adult birds are missing, but there are no other signs or disturbances. If chicks are missing, but there's no other signs of disturbance. If birds are dead but not eaten. If birds are dead and not eaten but are missing their heads. If birds are only wounded and not dead. If eggs are missing. If several birds are piled up in a corner or even flattened. If there's been a lot of serious damage to the coop. If latches have been opened. So from here, with a chart like this, and I know there's some others out there as well, then you begin to research more specifically your likely suspects here. These next two slides are also from my book because this is the kind of information you're looking to zero in on. Now, this is like for the raccoon. So in order to do research, you've got to learn a little bit more about their habits and behaviors. But most importantly, take a look at the details of the method of kill, because that will frequently give you more information to narrow things down here. The same thing with tracks and gait and scat. Those are more definitive clues. So now on to a little happier topic. We're going to talk about how to adopt some prevention strategies. So let's talk about what we can do to try to prevent this. So here's what works. These techniques are roughly in order of their value and effectiveness. And a thing to keep in mind is it's better to use several techniques in combination as well. And as you sort of look through them, you'll see that at the very bottom are fright techniques, those kinds of visual and auditory things. And even though they are the least productive technique to combat predation, they're often the first thing that people suggest to you. So just keep in mind that these things, this is the order of success in using these things. So let's start with fencing. Fencing is always your first line of defense. There are two types of fences. Drift fencing, which was designed to keep stock in, but not predators out. And exclusion fencing, which was also designed to keep predators out. Unfortunately, many of us inherit drift fencing with our farms because predation was not the problem 50 years ago that it is today. And both of these illustrations, by the way, are showing you some good exclusion fencing. It can be wire mesh or woven wire, or it can be multi-strand electric, or maybe high tensile wire with some electrified wires. Both of these examples, you need the wire spacing closer together near the bottom. It's best if you can get down to 2 or 3 inches near the bottom, moving up to maybe 4 to 6 inches as you move farther up. And that will exclude your smaller predators from sneaking through the fence. It's also good to include electric on the top because it helps discourage the larger predators that will attempt to climb or jump over the fence. Poultry netting works really well as long as it's poultry netting, and it's designed for use with poultry because the spaces, again, are much smaller, not only to keep the chickens in, but to keep predators out. The electrified netting that is often used with sheep has much larger openings. And you see my thing here that says no chicken wire. Hardware cloth is what you want to use if you have a choice. Chicken wire is very flimsy in the first place, and the openings are way too big. They're over an inch, and a weasel can slip through an inch, a rat could slip through an inch, a snake can slip through an inch, all kinds of things can grab your birds through an inch opening. So it's better to use hardware cloth that is smaller than 1 inch square. There is some chicken wire out there that has got smaller openings, but it's not typically what we see. You can also improve your existing fencing. Let's say you inherited drift fencing. You can add woven wire inside a board or rail fence, for instance. You can add livestock panels. You can add additional electric wires to fill in spaces where there's too big of gaps in your fencing, especially if you have something like barbed wire or non-electric wire. You need to also fill in spaces in open pipe or board gates and take care of water gaps and things like that as well. Sometimes you also need a buried apron, and this can be either on a fence or outside of a coop or a building. And these are the recommended depth and outward angle that you need to go. And again, you want to use good quality hardware cloth or very tight livestock panel pieces. And many people have suggested that if you can find the plastic coated hardware cloth, it lasts longer because it's going to be buried in the ground and eventually it will rust, and the plastic adds many years of life to it. There's also specialized fencing techniques that might be useful for you. Frequently around the coop or around a run, we'll have a solid barrier, maybe with fencing on the top. And that barrier, either solid metal or wooden, needs to go down about 6 inches, and it needs to be about 18 inches tall. And in particular, if you have problems with like cotton rats in the South, that solid barrier will be an enormous help to you. True predator exclusion fencing can be as tall as 6 feet with an overhang. It's stronger for large predators with smaller size mesh for smaller predators, and it has an apron at the bottom. But that's a major investment. Flappy fence is another possibility. It can be useful where your predator are things like possums and raccoons and cats and other climbers, because they climb up the outside part and they hate that floppy part, which is curved out. It's shaky and unstable, and it's not fixed rigidly. It's supposed to wobble a little bit, and they usually drop back. You can also pair it up with some hardware cloth on the bottom portion of this fence and then buried down underneath as an apron as well. So let's talk a little bit about poultry raising, because not only does that encompass this fencing here, but it encompasses the next thing we want to talk about, which is the shelter or the method in which you're raising your poultry. And this is our friend Joe Salatin, which many of us are familiar with, who has written extensively on pastured poultry. And it's something that we're all drawn to for both humane and health reasons, but we have to know that it is also the most dangerous way to raise poultry for them as far as predators are concerned. And there are choices in poultry raising. This is the order of sort of security for your poultry. And sometimes you need to make different choices for your poultry based on maybe their age or their breeding value or the season of the year that you need to protect them. So you might use a combination of these methods. So a secure coop is always the safest situation for your birds. You use hardware cloth, not chicken wire or chain link, and you have to cover the top and the bottom and the sides and the windows, even the vents. You'll need a buried apron. You need to make sure that all the doors and windows are tight fitting, because snakes can slip through loose doors that don't fit tightly. And raising the coop helps protect the birds from things like rats and weasels and snakes as well. And you can have a small backyard coop or a larger coop that maybe you use for your breeding stock. Another thing to consider are the latches. So, a determined raccoon is not fazed by deadbolts, hooks and eyes, or any other simple latch. You need to use something with a clip or a snap to stop them. And if you unfortunately have human predators around, you will probably need a padlock. Electric wire also can offer protection around your coop by, and you can see in the top picture on the left there, it's being used as a scare wire outside of a fenced-in run. Scare wires are sometimes called offset wires or standoff wires or trip wires. They run around the outside of a coop or a run or a fence. They're about 6 to 8 inches outside of it and generally 6 to maybe 12 inches at the most above ground. And it's a way to discourage predators from coming in trying to dig or to climb up the fence. If you have bears, and I know we've had a couple people ask us even before the session, you really need to invest in more secure bear proofing, and electricity is your friend because bears stay away from beehives and chicken coops and cabins and everything with electric wire. Then besides the shelter itself, you need to think about the coop, and we talked about that, how it needs to be fenced in securely, and covering the top of it in chicken wire or netting will deter hawks, although hardware cloth is more secure. Day use tubes, like you see on the upper right, are also a possibility to get your chickens out on grass, and they're also covered in it. You're sort of using them like a chicken tractor, but you're moving the chickens back in at night to safety. If your run is not covered on the top, or the area is too large to easily cover, then you can provide some overhead protection with wire or monofilament lines or netting. Even that bright orange deer or construction square netting works well in discouraging hawks or other birds of prey. What you're trying to do is obstruct their flight path. It's less secure than a cover, but it tends to keep them from being able to make some kind of flight in to grab a bird. And people get very creative with this, obviously. So chicken tractors, whether they're commercial or homemade, you just need to pay attention to the same sort of security design elements. They need to be like tight hardware cloth rather than chicken wire, secure latches, an apron or a floor on the bottom that's resting on the pasture or the grass. Something that's also possible when you're using chicken tractors is the easier use of a livestock guard dog. As long as the tractors are in a fenced area that will keep the dogs in, the dogs can roam around the tractors, and you don't have to go through the process of sort of training your dogs to accept being out with free-range chickens, but they provide excellent protection because nothing's going to get up to the tractor if the dogs are out there. Then there's yarded poultry. Yarded poultry actually means that your birds are in a secure coop at night, plus they are surrounded by fencing. And that could be something like electronet or permanent fencing. You might be moving them to different areas, but there needs to be fencing and they need to be secure at night. Things to consider if you're doing this is to try to reduce the predator hiding places near the pastures, obstruct flight paths if you need to, remove perching sites, or make the site uncomfortable for the bird to perch on. If you can put the food and water inside the coop or in a protected area, then the poultry don't congregate out around the food and water in a more open, vulnerable spot, which is more likely that a bird of prey could get them. And you can use things like freight techniques or overhead wires as well if you need to. Finally, free range, and that can be either a few birds in your yard or a field full. Now, it is a less safe way to raise poultry, but you can improve it. One is to have the birds enclosed by fencing. If you're going to think about using livestock guard dogs, they need fencing anyway. And having them in with the birds inside a fence has already improved their safety. If you can coop the birds from dusk to dawn by training them to return to the coop, they're going to be a lot safer. Some people make really great use of those automatic door closing systems. My daughter-in-law has one. She loves it. Keep roosters that are a threat. They're more alert to threats and they're a bit protective. They're not a livestock guard dog, obviously, but they are another sort of line of protection. Use mixed species grazing inside these areas since the larger animals or even geese will discourage predators. Make sure you provide shelter for your poultry from birds of prey and reduce the perching and hiding sites inside or next to the free range area. Put food and water inside the coop or a protected area so the poultry aren't congregating again in an open, vulnerable spot. If the area you use is very large, consider subdividing it using, temporary electric netting, because even if you have a livestock guard dog out there, huge areas are hard to protect against fast bird of prey attacks, and that the dog simply can't get there fast enough. So if you can break up the area and move them somewhat, you give the dog a better chance if you're using a dog. And then finally, use fright techniques and mix them up. So we have talked about Livestock Guardians before in this series that we've done for FACT. And I'd really like to refer you to that, because we did 3 dedicated webinars on this, and including this excellent video that you could take a look at. They are fantastic at protecting birds. I had some people ask even earlier, though, how, why isn't the dog maybe being as alert to birds of prey as I expected it to be? Frankly, sometimes you have to teach your livestock guard dog to chase away large birds, and you have to sort of make a fool out of yourself by running around and chasing and screaming at them as well. And doing that a few times will usually let your dog know that that's what you want as well. I'll be honest with you and suggest that if you only have a handful of poultry or you have a very small area, it's probably a lot more practical and cost saving and offers more immediate protection to create a secure coop and a run rather than to go out and buy and train a livestock guard dog. Interestingly, research has also shown that a single llama can make an excellent poultry guardian against smaller predators, if that's your threat. There was a recent study of 136 ranches, and llamas, just using Guardian Llama, reduced their losses by 40 to 60%. So if smaller predators are your problem. So that leads us into mixed grazing, because llamas are a form of mixed grazing, just like donkeys, but it's also useful to have sheep, goats, other livestock. Any larger animals out where your poultry are will give predators some pause and sometimes may actually deter it. I have had very protective ewes that will chase a coyote across a field. So they extend their protection to them. Something that is becoming a little bit more popular too, is the use of watch geese. Now, geese are naturally territorial, and they're loud, and they're observant to birds of prey, but meanwhile they are large enough that they themselves are not usually a prey animal of these birds. They can also fend off small predators such as weasels or skunks or rodents. Obviously, they can't protect against coyotes or bobcats or the larger, but they will alert. And the trick here is to raise a single goose with chicks so that the goose imprints on them, and then it will bond to them and stay with them. If you do keep multiple geese, they will tend to bond to each other, but they are still a good deterrence from small predators if they're grazing with your other poultry. You can pasture them with your chickens. They need drinking water in deeper containers than the typical chicken water. The parasites are different in geese and ducks and turkeys and chickens, so they don't infect each other as well either. And so it works out pretty well. So any goose breed can offer some protection, but the African or Chinese, which are the ones with the knobbed heads, are larger and noisier. And can be a slightly more protective immediate deterrence. You often hear, obviously, about a rooster, and a rooster is protective, but he's still also very vulnerable. And I have owned roosters that gave up their life protecting their hens. They're helpful to you, they're helpful to your flock, but you can't count on them to be the ultimate protector. And a lot of folks will tell you that guineas would be good for guarding poultry. Guineas are alert and noisy and protective and eat bugs and everything, but there's a couple of downfalls in that male guineas can be very aggressive to your other poultry, especially roosters if you keep them. And they make a lot of noise, and they easily become feral and things like that. If you do want to try raising some guineas with your chickens as some protection, raise female guineas with chicks, and again, like with the geese, they're more likely to bond with them and then stay with them as they become adults. Besides the things we've talked about, you need to take a look at eliminating attractants on your farm. Your goal is to eliminate predator hiding places, places where they can attack your birds, and to avoid things that attract other predators or their prey, such as rats, to your farm and near your poultry areas. The good thing is these efforts are usually pretty inexpensive and they're fairly easy to tackle. The trick is often keeping up these good practices. This is something, however, that you can also work with your immediate neighbors with. If you can all mutually agree to try to reduce some of these attractants, and to discourage any kind of habituation, not tolerating coyotes or other animals in your yard and chasing them off and frightening them away. If you're all doing that, it works out much better. Landscaping itself is another factor in this. What you're trying to do is improve your line of sight so that you can monitor and observe what's going on. So you want to remove brush and other cover where predators could hide near the fences or near the buildings. You also need to think about limiting access, and it's not just your chicken coop. It can be all the pet doors and doors to garages and outbuildings and openings and decks and window wells and vents. All these places are hiding places for small predators like raccoons and skunks and things, and then they're on your property and close to your predators. Use predator-proof latches on all these places as well. Try to remove overhanging branches and perching sites near your poultry areas, since they attract birds of prey and climbing predators who can then drop into the pens. Remove things like wood and rubbish and stones that are piled up near fences or near buildings, because they attract rodents and snakes, and then they bring in other predators. And as we've mentioned before, open water can be a real attractant to a lot of predators. Think about animal feed and food waste. Don't feed wildlife. If you are bird feeding wild birds, you need to use those good strategies that are like using baffles and spill pans with feeders and cleaning up, because that is attracting in birds of prey who are preying on the birds who are coming to your bird feeder. Feed pets inside and your farm animals inside whenever possible. If they have to be fed outside, see if you can either remove it at night or not overfeed them grain or food that's out all night that will draw in wild animals. You need to securely cover and protect animal feed, clean up spills, things like that. People don't think about, like, even their compost piles. They attract in predators as well, and so they need to be covered up. You need to remove things like rotting fruit and that are nuts that might be in your orchard, things that will attract in animals. Finally, the fright techniques we all talk about. Predators do habituate to these techniques, and often within a very short time. So it's really helpful to change things up and move them around. They're more effective in combination, and they're best if they're random or responsive to motion. So night lighting is good. Motion sensitive lighting is better than static lighting, because it's operating in a scarier way to predator. Scarecrows and effigies of things are even better if they move or they have lights or they make sounds. Music and talk radio is surprisingly good, and it's better if it has lower sounds and bass sounds, because it sounds like people talking inside a barn or a building. And then there's something to consider, is that night lighting can actually sometimes attract owls or roaming dogs, especially if it's the kind of night lighting that's on all the time, because they then sort of focus in on that area. So finally, good husbandry, and this is your job. This is your part of taking care of animals. So you need to be paying attention to them and observing them frequently. Remove any dead or ill animals, because they also are an attractant to predators. Protect nestlings a lot, because they are the most vulnerable. Haze predators that come around. Don't let them habituate to you or your farm. There are a couple different poultry animals that have some different considerations a little bit. Right now, there's a real increased interest and market for historic turkey breeds, and they're healthier raised out on pasture. So that is the way that people who are raising these birds for market tend to do it. Most losses occur on pasture with growing turkeys. Breeding turkeys are usually securely housed in coops or runs. If you are going to raise turkeys and out on pasture, try to delay putting them on pasture to they're at least 10 to 12 weeks of age, because it will really eliminate a window of their extreme vulnerability to raptors. Use the same kind of fencing techniques we've talked about, like portable electric net or one of the other good fences. Fences need to be at least 4 feet high, and the problem with turkeys is they fly easily. So you may need to trim the wing feathers if you're having trouble with escapees. Again, use smaller grazing areas, day shelters, night housing if possible. With turkeys, and just some of the other techniques we've talked about, using a livestock guard dog or a llama or some other kind of companion animal, or other animals in your pasture, and all the same things that we've talked about. I do know people who will build a perimeter fence for their birds and then sort of build a secondary fence around that. So there's almost like a no man's land or moat around the turkey pasture, and that's where they'll put a livestock guard dog out. And then, other than birds of prey, the livestock guard dogs will eliminate most things from coming into the turkey pasture without having to actually be trained to be safe with the turkeys. And as turkeys get larger, they're not very vulnerable to birds of prey. If you're raising ducks or geese, they're vulnerable to the same predators as chickens. And part of the problem is that owners typically want to give them some access to water. And then you're opening yourself up to some other predators who we know are more likely to be found near water. So same things that we want to talk about: fencing, consider pasture shelters and smaller rotational paddocks to put them in that a dog can protect against, and consider putting them away at night. And ducks and geese can be trained just as easily as chickens to return to a coop at night. And you could use movable coops, you can use even farm buildings, tractors, different things. And it's also possible to create completely enclosed housing or coops, if you're interested, to protect them if you're in the area of a lot of predators. So we want to encourage you to learn more about the predators like we've been talking about, because this is going to foster coexistence. And consumers also value predators. And this is something that I know FACT feels very strongly as well. It's a form of value-added marketing to your eggs or your meat products if they know that you value organic, sustainable, predator or wildlife-friendly methods of raising livestock. And the things we've talked about today all meet those qualifications. And that's something to be proud of and to use with your customers. So I wanted to do a couple of questions that I received earlier before we take your questions today. And here were some that I had that were very common. A lot of people were talking about escapees over fences. You can find good instructions online about clipping the flight feathers, and you only need to do one wing. You're just going to clip the primaries, the first bunch of them on the wing, and you can just clip them with scissors. You don't want to clip down so far that you're injuring the wing, obviously. The only thing you need to be careful of is that when the feathers are actually growing, you can't do this. You can't cut into feathers where you see a blood supply in the shaft. So that would be after molting when they're growing feathers. But it's very easy at other times to clip flight feathers, and that does help keep them in. I had several people send in questions about ravens. And hopefully everything that we have mentioned and talked about will help you. But raven problems like black vulture problems are becoming more serious because the birds are working together in groups. And the only solution I know for black vulture problems are livestock guard dogs, often in a pair. And I think if you're having persistent, difficult problems with ravens, that's another thing that you're going to have to consider. Black vultures, livestock guard dogs are doing an excellent job against black vultures, even with people who are raising cattle. In general, all aerial predator problems are increasing. And part of that is due to the return of large birds of prey populations that are growing. If you're going to work with a livestock guard dog, it's a time-consuming thing. It does work well in the long run, but you can't see it as an instantaneous cure. So you may need to do some other things in the meanwhile. And the other thing to consider is the thing that we mentioned before is they can't do as well when they're trying to cover a huge area that birds might be loose in. Or if they're already focused on your sheep or goats or other animals out in a pasture, you can't expect them to also be focused on a separate area where your poultry are, and you may need another dog in that area. So, Larissa, have you been keeping track of any other questions that we have?
Yeah, thank you so much, Jan. That was fantastic. We do have time to answer some questions as they come in. So please feel free, those of you that are online, to type into that left-hand side of the screen to submit a question. We will read the question and then Jan will answer it. There was a question, I think this is in relation to the turkey slide, and the question about using donkeys as guardian animals, and any thoughts on that?
Donkeys are not going to bond to birds in to the point where they're emotionally protecting them. They function as a bit of a protector to birds, just like they do with sheep or anything else. They're aggressive to canines, and they are, formidable when confronted with them. They don't tend to be very aware of birds of prey, and that makes them less effective than even llamas, who did seem to care about birds of prey attacking their own young, so they're alert for them. Donkeys and their foals are not normally, threatened by birds of prey. So donkeys and mules or any other large animal that might be out in your pasture may not take seriously birds of prey. I have seen sheep and goats that are concerned about birds of prey. And again, it's because I think they're sort of extending the protection or the alertness they have for their own lambs or towards a bird of prey, because they would be vulnerable to them. So donkeys are good for some things, but probably not quite as good as a llama, frankly, or sheep or a goat. Horned cattle can be good because they're also aggressive against some predators.
Thank you for that. So I have just a couple questions that I can answer that are, or at least I can start to answer more logistically. So I shared a copy, a link to the PDF of the presentation, and folks were wondering, well, first of all, I'm going to be emailing that out to all of you tomorrow along with the recording of the presentation, and all of that will also be on our website archive. So you can feel free to share that with other people that might be interested. And there's also a question, Jan, about the what attacked my poultry chart that you went over, and if there's a way to get a high resolution copy of that, I imagine besides by buying the book.
It's in the book. We could take a look at it and see if we can do that, but it would have to be blown up from a small page. I don't know if my publisher would let me do that.
Right. Yeah. Well, and I think that folks weren't able to see it so well on the screen, but once you have the PDF of it, it might be a little bit easier to read because it's
or if you could stop and take a look at a screen and maybe enlarge it a little bit.
Yeah. And just so you know, we're getting that little bit of audio feedback.
All right. Stay away from my computer.
Yeah. So question, will my Border Collie and an LGD work okay together? So the question is, can you have other dogs besides LGDs? And I don't know. I know that we had, there might be something that you can refer folks to from past presentations.
Generally speaking, livestock guardian dogs are selected and bred to instinctually respond as protectors to animals. And Border Collie, herding dogs, hunting dogs, various other kinds of breeds that you might have as a farm dog, don't have the same combination of instincts that make them bond so deeply to stock that can live with stock 24 hours a day or birds and afford that kind of protection. You might have a farm dog that is good with your birds and will chase off things, but your odds of success are always much greater when you buy a kind of dog that's suited to that job. I raise corgis too as my herding dogs, and I tell people, they could jump in the water and bring back a duck, but they're not going to do that nearly as well as a retriever, and it would be kind of a foolish object for me. I also have herding dogs, and my collie would not be a good protector of my chickens. So it might be kind of an individual thing, but nothing can really beat the specialist in the field, which is the Livestock Guard Dog breeds.
Thank you for that. So next question, we got African geese, one for layers and one for ducks. They are not aggressive or aware of birds of prey. Is this because they did not imprint on the chicks?
Oh, if they're with chickens and they weren't raised, they didn't do that imprinting thing, they can just care more about themselves. Like we mentioned, if you have more than one goose, it is often they just care about each other and they don't really focus on those chicks. And that's why the trick that people who have used this successfully advocate is that you just raise one and you raise it with your chicks as a baby so that it imprints on the chickens and it considers itself part of that flock.
And there's no way you can kind of change that behavior after the fact.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I think it's probably an individual thing.
Yeah. Next question is, any tips for bald eagle nesting areas?
Bald eagle, yeah, it's really tricky because so much about bald eagles is governed by the U.S. Migratory Bird Act, and you have to be super careful. I have talked a lot to people who are keeping pastured poultry more in the southern states where they're out more year round, and then some people are having terrific troubles with bald eagles. And it's a unique problem if you're having that problem, and I think you really need to talk to the federal and state authorities who may or may not be able to help you somewhat. It's definitely a problem where it exists, and I have great sympathy for people who have this problem. I'm not sure you could move back their nesting sites far enough away, to help yourself. I do know you could discourage vultures, black vultures, by the use of effigies, which look like a dead vulture. They're not a real dead vulture. People sell them, and there's plans online for making them, and you hang them up in the trees where the vultures tend to nest. And it is possible that they would also discourage other kinds of birds like eagles. So you can try that. I know that some cities and areas try that as well, hanging up these effigies. It's a problem.
Yeah, it's very tricky. Thank you for that. Another question, can water be a deterrent to small predators, such as digging a moat that rats and etc. Wouldn't want to swim across?
Possibly, but I think a lot of animals could swim better there and it might be also an attract water snakes and all kinds of other things as well. I would put my money in, good underground apron and a good fence, probably instead.
Yeah. Are hardware cloth aprons horizontally laid around the coop as effective as buried barriers?
If they are more effective than nothing, because they're there and they will prevent digging down. The most effective way is to angle them down because you're preventing it's hard to explain, sort of a larger area where animals might start to bury down. Certainly it's better to lay them down flat and secure them to the ground with pins or something than not have them at all. But they don't tend to work as well for snakes and rats and things unless they go down into the ground.
Right. Okay. Question about the Livestock Guardian Dog webinars that we offered last year. They are available online. I just want folks to know. I will send out kind of a link to where they all are housed. We have the audio visual presentations and then just the slides. So keep an eye out for that. So another observation is, let's see, I read an article about building American kestrel housing with orchards in Michigan. I wonder if you can use a bird of prey to discourage other birds of prey, i.e. is a niche already taken? Have you heard anything like that?
I have not heard anything about that. It sounds like something that might be a really good study, though, and to see if it works. But no, I haven't heard anything about that.
Okay. Let's see. Okay, one last question I have here at this point is, will geese be aggressive toward people, especially children, if kept as guards?
They might be.
Yeah.
But roosters are the same way. I think all of us know that we've had roosters that we couldn't keep just because they were too dangerous to children. And so it's sort of a iffy individual thing, I will admit.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other questions for the good of the order? Do we have some questions about breeds of dogs used for livestock guarding? Now they're starting to roll in. I'm going to refer folks to Livestock Guardian Dog questions to the webinars, and then any follow-up questions you have after watching those, you might be able to get in touch with Jan. Let's see. Oh, yes. And Julie from Michigan, who mentioned that technique, said that she would send along a link
Sure,
to the
I would love
article.
to see. That'd be interesting. I would say that when we did the Livestock Guardian dog webinars, we included that video, which even for your other farm dogs on your property, it can be useful in teaching them how to behave properly with chickens. I can't, it's not a guarantee, but the techniques that are used in the video for working with dogs and poultry, I think, are applicable beyond just livestock guard dogs.
Absolutely. Okay, well, I just have a few housekeeping items before we sign off tonight. For those of you still on, immediately following this webinar, you're going to be asked to complete just a very brief survey, like I mentioned earlier, and we would greatly appreciate it if you take a minute to tell us about your experience. Like I mentioned as well, a recording of the webinar and the slides will be available soon. They will be archived on our website, and I will email those to you tomorrow, along with links to some of the other resources that Jan mentioned. And we do have quite a few other webinars coming up I'd like to call your attention to. You can join us next Monday, same time, same place, for predator protection for livestock. Jan will be back to discuss strategies to keep your cattle, goats, and sheep safe from predators such as coyotes, larger predators, and roaming dogs and birds of prey. And finally, in case you haven't heard, we are currently accepting applications to participate in our Humane Farming Mentorship Program. It's a year-long phone-based program that's designed for livestock and poultry farmers who wish to raise their animals on pasture using sustainable and humane methods. So if you're a beginning farmer seeking personalized guidance on business strategies and animal management practices, or an experienced farmer who has a knack for teaching, you might wish to apply. The program is very flexible and is tailored to meet individual needs and goals. The application deadline is January 31st. So on that note, that is all the time we have for tonight. I'd like to give a huge thank you to you, Jan, for your really fantastic presentation, like usual, and for taking the time to answer our questions. And thanks to all of our audience members for your attention and interest. I hope that you all have a very wonderful evening. Happy New Year, and that we connect again soon. Goodbye and thank you.